anybody has any questions. This mic is obviously falling to pieces, so just stand up where you are, put your hand up, and you can just ask questions. Here you go, Dave.
I would just like to echo the wisdom of the other speakers we just heard. And what I'm a pot activist, have been for over 20 years, and I've been a lifelong NDP member, but I'm definitely going to vote Liberal for the first time in my life. But now, having said that, I'm on the Liberal side, go Justice. But having said that,
we have membership forms back.
I'll fill them up, and I'll get lots of young people and growers and dealers to vote Liberal as well. But now I got to do my job and make sure their interests are represented. We don't just settle for any kind of legalization, we get a good kind of legalization. So I don't really have a question, I just want to pass on some of the wisdom that I've learned in my 20 years to your leadership. So if you could pass these thoughts on, I'd be greatly appreciative. We can learn what a good form of legalization is and what a bad form of legalization is from the experiments currently taking place in the United States. For example, in Washington State, you're not allowed to grow your own pot at home. That's a mistake, because a lot of people are going to get punished who shouldn't be punished. So harmless people getting punished. They also have a really bad impairment policy where you're testing for nanograms instead of testing for impairment. So I want to echo John's wisdom about videotaping, walk a straight line, count backwards from 100, that sort of thing. That has to be a part of the Liberals' legalization model. I also want to echo Jody's statement that it's not pot that hurts young people or teens. It's prohibition that hurts young people and teens. And I hear a myth, the new reefer madness, about how cannabis lowers IQs of teenagers, cannabis causes psychosis of teenagers. But if you look closely at these studies, they never prove causality. They never demonstrate these things happening in large segments of the population. Like, for example, pot use went from 1% to 10% in all age groups from 1950 to today. But you don't see a 1% to 10% rise in psychosis or a lowering of IQs to match that increased use. So we got to be careful that the new reefer madness doesn't fool us like the old reefer madness does. And we have to create a form of legalization that protects all harmless people from all harm and doesn't find new ways to harm the harmless. So I want to send this message to the Liberal Party executives that if they can come up with an inclusive model that protects everybody, then me and a bunch of other activists will make sure that the Liberals stay in power for the next 50 to 100 years.
How long do you think it take to actually come up with the legislative stuff that it would take to make the system legal? We elect the Liberals at the end of next year, and they get settled in there, and they start hiring their legal people to write a rather complex set of laws, or they could just adopt the wine laws and just scratch out alcohol and put it in. But, I imagine this is a huge legislative task to actually produce this body of law. Would that be
I'm not convinced that it's, if you can hear me okay? I'm not convinced that it's a difficult task. All you have to do is remove it from Schedule 2 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. That takes it out of the criminal law. And it stands still, unless you come up with legislation where you pass it over to the provinces. The provinces, deal with alcohol. They play a role in tobacco and these sorts of things. So it is a big problem that the provinces aren't stepping up here and indicating what their position is. Certainly in the medical area, people who need coverage for medical plans and stuff like that, that's all provincial, and the feds aren't doing anything to communicate with the provinces about that. But so getting rid of its involvement in the criminal law is easy. It may not be that easy to then have your legalization model. Washington State is grappling with various problems, as is Colorado. Unfortunately, we have them
that we can look at. We can also look at Uruguay. We can look at the Netherlands. They simply don't enforce the law. There are other places, Spain, for example, Portugal. So there's lots of places where you simply don't enforce. And really, my view is, as I think I said a bit earlier, they don't always enforce the law here either. Dana said the possession charges are up, but the reason why the possession charges are up is because if they smell marijuana, they arrest you for possession. But then usually they find more and charge you with trafficking or possession for the purpose of trafficking. If you look at the statistics on the possession charges, sure, they're way up, but they don't go to court. They get dropped. The number of convictions for possession is way down, even though the charges are way up. So statistics are a bit misleading. But, it seems to me the Liberals have got a policy. They should now be looking at exactly what structure do they need in order to try and first create a situation that freezes the situation, stops people being processed through the criminal law federally, and start talking to the provinces about a model in terms of distribution and so on, like the individual states. It's up to the provinces ultimately, it seems to me, to be the legal model, not the feds. The feds' power is criminal law, the provinces is property and civil rights, constitutionally.
Can I actually ask you a fault? Could that mean that federal legalization, some provinces can choose not to allow at the provincial level? Could we have a model like that? Could that happen? I mean, alcohol, they each set their own age limits and rules. And when alcohol was prohibited, it was done provincially.
Yeah,
so could the federal government say, we're going to legalize it, but Alberta say, fine, but we're not going to allow that to happen in our province? Is that...
Theoretically, yeah. Yeah, you could have wet states and dry states and all the stuff that you had with alcohol, but ultimately, it's up to, under our constitutional structure, property and civil rights in the province is up to the provinces. And so even if the feds did pass some new legalization statute or something, I would suspect that it'll only be a matter of time before there's a constitutional challenge.
My name is John Arthur, and I'm seeking the Liberal nomination where we're standing in Kingsway. I can't obviously speak for the party at all, but my own viewpoint to respond to that question about timing is I think it's going to happen year one, simply because we're already seeing the train leave the station in the United States. And this industry that we could have, that I think Dana has described eloquently, the Bordeaux of Bud in British Columbia, we're going to lose that to Washington, I think. So I would certainly, personally advocate that be a year one priority.
In answer to the question, is it a big job? I don't see it as being any bigger a job than writing any other new legislation. And whoever we elect, I mean, that's why we pay them the big bucks. That's their job, writing that stuff. And talk to Sangeeta, she's already working on what's the Liberals' one going to be. That's the draft policy we've already proposed, so getting started.
Here, here.
Other questions?
Question for John, mainly around the MMAR. Obviously, it's not a perfect piece of legislation, right? And that's why it's kind of deals with the MMPR. But now that there's an injunction, there is a chance you might go back to the MMAR, of course. But there's still problems with it, and Dana kind of alluded to it a little bit. So how do you really, how can you address the problems within the MMAR without repealing it completely? Because there's a lot of abuse, and a lot of black market is funded by the designated grower program that's under the MMAR, right? It's not commonly known, but that's in fact what happens, and there are documentaries that kind of cover this stuff. So how do you address that problem, within that, without going complete opposite route for the MMPR?
Well, firstly, you should understand that our action is solely to preserve the right of the individual to produce for him or herself, and if they're unable to do so, to have a caregiver do it for them. That is a small part of the MMAR. The rest of the MMAR we're happy to see disappear, and it has been repealed effective March 31st. All that currently exists is those portions of the MMAR that allow you to continue to produce for yourself or have a caregiver do so. and any of the provisions of the MMPR, which is the marijuana for medical purposes, the new regs, that's inconsistent with those provisions of the MMAR don't apply to the patients who are covered by the injunction. So, from my perspective and from what I've been gathering from the people that I've been talking to, we don't have much difficulty with the MMPR. The more licensed producers we have in Canada, the better. Ultimately, they will be a part of the legal market. And so, let's get started and get all these licensed producers out there, get them producing, and hopefully, let's see what happens. Now, what happened, the statistics, we went from 100 patients in, I think, 2000 to 38,000 as of the end of last year, and about 27,000, probably closer to 30,000 personal production, about 5,000 designated growers, and then the other people were getting it from the government through Prairie Plant. That's basically what it was at the end. So, yes, people were growing out the back door, mortgage helpers, excessive production is happening, but relative to the numbers, it's actually very small. The police focus, understandably, on organized crime that they think are infiltrating people who are using it as a front to produce excessively and so on, and that is happening. But it's like maybe 300 or 400 cases compared to 38,000 people. So we know that, the great majority of the medically licensed people are trying to do it properly and so on. If you have a legal market, though, I'd like to just point out that you do have to deal with zoning. You do have to deal with electrical safety. You do have to deal with these issues if you're going to be able to grow in your own home. And you do have to deal with smell. When I cross-examined Janine Reedshot from, who was running the program at the end, she had this huge stack of complaints from neighbors about smell. So you've got lots of people out there growing marijuana who are not being very courteous or concerned about their neighbors and need to be. I put to her, well, why didn't you do something about it? Why didn't you, get in touch with these permit holders and tell them what they were doing? Oh, it's not within Health Canada's jurisdiction to control smell, she said. So, it's important that people who are involved in marijuana make sure they don't upset their neighbors, make sure they don't interfere with the peaceful and quiet enjoyment of their neighbors. Their neighbors are entitled to not have to, have the smell around them which they don't like. So it's important to be ambassadors and advocates to lead by a good example and show that this can be regulated without causing problems for other people. Mold is one they raised. They couldn't give me a single case of a person who had suffered mold as a result of doing their own grow-up. They had a few pictures from some illegal grow-ups of some mold. Anybody who lives in British Columbia knows that if they have a shower and don't make sure that you've got, the fans on, you're going to get mold in your bathroom. It doesn't take very long. So mold, smell, proper construction, electrical zoning, all these things have to be thought about, and obviously, it seems to me something worked out with individual cities and municipalities who have people who are doing that on a regular basis for other reasons anyway, in order to reduce the costs of that sort of thing. So, just one little comment because of the, I think it might have been, I forget who anyway, talked about the teenagers and the brain thing. They treat people when they turn 17 as adults, and they'd send them off to war. Think about what impact that might have on their brains before they turn 24. So don't get, thrown off by these things that people constantly throw out. There's all these other examples of things that we do, besides people smoking marijuana, that can be risky for young people's brains. And always remember this. I've been practicing criminal law for over 40 years. Every time there's a crime out there, the media will repeat it over and over again, understandably, because that's what people want. I'm not blaming the media at all. People want titillating stories. The media would go broke if they didn't report them. But you have to remember that that's what they are. They're unusual and exceptional stories. They're not routine, mundane stories that I see on a daily basis that would bore you to death. And so, remember that. When you see the stats that the crime rate is down, it is down. Don't think that it's up just because you keep hearing all these stories. There's a great distortion about crime out there, and there's always been the same distortion about cannabis and marijuana. And so that's part of our problem, is getting people to stop being so emotionally gut reactive to these words and to come and try and use their heads and be rational and logical about it. Thank you.
John, I had a question just to sort of follow up to what you were mentioning there. You talked about the mold issue and some other things. It's been recently reported in some of the Vancouver newspapers on the grow-off home fires. And some of the reporting has said that, I think it's quoting old Len Garris and Daryl Plekas studies. The Vancouver province said that a grow-off home is 24 times more likely to have a fire in it than a regular home. But in my own number crunching, I have found that in the past 10 years at least, I think it's 8 to 10 years, actually it's quite the opposite of that. It shows that a regular home is much more likely, 10 times more likely to have a fire than a grow-off home. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about home fires.
I'm glad you asked about that one, because of course that was a big one. They put all sorts of statistics out there, but I think they had, and it was in the Vancouver Sun while I was away, I think they said 36 fires over 8 years, and I think, Steve, didn't you write a letter to the editor that explained the whole thing? And I've got his graph, which shows how they were going down while the other things are going up, and yet, they're going on about this problem. Look, if the illegal grow-uppers often take shortcuts and do all these sorts of things in order to push the stuff out the door in order to sell it. Interestingly enough, there's a glut on the market right now, partly because of excessive production out the back door, because of Colorado, because of Washington State, Uruguay. There's so much marijuana that the price has gone down. Experts in court a few weeks back tell me it's $900 a pound. So you can't sell the stuff. So organized crime doesn't want to go and rip off a grow if they can't sell the stuff. The patients who have been abusing their licenses and selling out the back door are going to find they can't get rid of the product. So, this oversupply has been more effective than drug prohibition in the last 100 years. We've got illegal grow-ups shutting up shop left, right, and center, is what I'm being told. And anyway, to just come back to the fire issue, the Fire Commissioner statistics that I researched show that the major cause of fire in homes are kitchens. Usually, guys of my age leaving the pot on the stove, different type of pot. And that's what causes the fire. And, when you go through those statistics, it doesn't break it down and say, grow up, or, and they say, oh, well, we don't have a category to plug that in. So Len Garris, some time ago, came up with this 24 times. All the electricians, certified electricians and so on that I talk to say, if you have it inspected properly, if you have it done by a certified electrician, you have no greater risk than any other electrical or other thing that you put in your home. Of course you increase the risks the more, of these sorts of things you have in a house that are electrical, that could have electrical fires. I mean, that's just understandable, but you try to have it done properly, then you won't have a problem. Len Garris, I'm told, and I don't know if I should say this publicly because I may want to use him as a witness, but I'm told that I think Riel Kapler sat down with him at an event, and he agreed that if they were properly inspected and properly regulated, then it wouldn't be a problem. His concern and the stuff that he always talks about is the unregulated, uninspected. And I think that last newspaper article, he actually, they talked about the unregulated and the uninspected, because Health Canada had the power under the MMAR to do inspections and to respond to complaints, and they hardly did any. And the police documents that they've actually put forward in this case, Len Garris included, the fire people talk about how Health Canada has really been the problem. They didn't try to inspect. They didn't try to make sure that people were doing things properly, and they just allowed it to disintegrate to the point where they had a reasonable number of abuses in a number of places. So, fire mold, public safety was the other one, and as I say, that shouldn't be as big a risk if there's an oversupply, and medical people usually have security precautions and so on. So I think those were the main issues that you asked about.
I got a question, John.
Thanks. More on that fire issue. It's quite funny. The lesson to everybody, by the way, you want to learn the basics of statistics, the very basics of statistics, and the very basics of evidence in order to deal with news stories. Because the Vancouver Sun put out this news story that Jeremiah referred to. In the past 8 years, there were 36 fires in grow-ops. This was front page, and there was a big, scary picture of a fire next to it. And nearly a quarter of those were in medical grow-ops. Well, what they don't mention, and the important question is, how big a number is 36? Well, nearly a quarter of 36, by my math, that equals 8. Well, so all I did was I looked up the statistics from Health Canada on how many medically licensed grow-ops there were at the time. About 11,000. 8 out of 11,000. So what that news story in fact told you, and it doesn't take a sophisticated calculator to do this, was that out of all the grow-ops, out of all the medical grows in BC, 99.93% of them didn't have fires over 8 years.
Wow.
So what was presented as a scare story, if you actually work out the numbers, and it doesn't take that much work, but you have to be conscientious and do it, you find that there is pretty much nothing to be scared about. The 24 times more likely, that is referred to in one of the attachments to Shane Holmquist's affidavit. The footnote is to a paper by guess who? It's not Lingaris. Plagas. And I'm going to have to actually go to the UFV to find the paper and read it because it wasn't published.
The paper doesn't even, he makes that 24 times claim in the paper. It's not even supported by his own evidence in the paper. The paper is terrible.
You've got it?
Yeah, it's not even in there. He mentions it, but it's never backed up, so it's a total fraud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there more questions about other issues? One more question? Go ahead.
For John Connor there, you mentioned September 30th for the injunction relief. I know that under crossing, I think that's what it is, but I guess for clarity, are patients protected right now as of September 30th or as of March 21st, which is what Health Canada is saying?
The problem is that the judge, when he made his order, instead of tossing the ball to the government to make sure everybody would be covered who had a valid license, said, okay, everybody who is valid as of the date of the order in terms of your authorization to possess. But for your production designated grower, it's September 30th, 2013. So if you have a valid license that existed on September 30th, 2013 to produce for yourself or as a designated grower to produce for someone, then that license remains valid as far as the number of plants you can produce as far as your storage is concerned. The authorization to possess, however, if it expired prior to March 21, which was the date of the order, the interpretation of the order is that you're not covered. Some people, quite a few people were renewed and were valid on March 31st, and so they're fine. But there's this group that's not covered by the MMAR. So what they have to do is they have to go to their doctors and get a prescription. The doctor will react to that word because it means a whole bunch of different things to them than the plain meaning of the word. Write something on a piece of paper that authorizes you, I say, the same grams per day or whatever you had under the MMAR. Regulation 53 of the Narcotic Control Regulations has existed for as long as I've been practicing. It is the section that allows doctors to give, sell, authorize, administer, prescribe any narcotic in the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act to a patient for a medical condition that they're treating them for. So if you get a piece of paper from your doctor, it doesn't need Health Canada's approval or anything like that, and if your doctor's been prepared to sign your MMAR papers, then presumably you won't be into a doctor issue problem. You get them to sign that so that at least your possession is covered pending the court case. If you've got a valid license, you're covered, except on your possession thing, the judge brought in the 150-gram max that's taken from the MMPR, which is fine if you've got a license of 5 grams a day, but anything over 5 grams a day, it's going to cause a problem for people. You won't be able to go away from your source or supply for more than a week. This is going to be particularly a problem for the approximately 90 people in Canada who have licenses for 150 grams per day. So they will be housebound if that limitation remains.